So, hey guys, my name is Ralph Lakang, and you can call me Mr. Green, and I will be your teacher for today, and our topic will be all about plot outline. Here, let me show you real quick. So, here it is. So, our topic for today would be all about plot outlining. So, let me give you the lowdown on it, starting off with, of course, the basics. So, three stages when outlining. So, the first stage is the arrangement of thoughts. Next would be the creation of the framework. And lastly would be the execution of the plans. So this is very important for writers because plots are mainly used in poems, in short stories, and in novels. So in order for a writer to have an effective plot or an effective product, first he or she must have to arrange his or her thoughts, the concept, what would be the story all about, and the likes. And after the gathering of information, the writer then needs to create a framework. The framework here would serve as the exoskeleton of the entire piece, the entire literary piece that he or she would be writing. And of course, lastly would be the execution of all the arrangements and all the creation of the framework. So, and after we have the basic elements of a plot. So, basic elements include expositions, conflict, rising action, climax, and the resolution. So, I'm going to explain to you one by one. So, but before that, the stories have a plot or a series of events that center in a problem or a conflict, because a story without a conflict would not be a story, it's only a narration. Thus, the plots reform. And the first element of a plot would be the exposition. So, exposition includes the time, the setting, and the character, which involves the protagonist and the antagonist, and the theme. So, time. When we say time, when the story happens. The same time for the setting where the story is happening. And for the characters, we have the protagonist and the antagonist. When we say protagonist, they are the ones who are highlighted as the heroes or the underdogs in the story, while the antagonists are the one oppressing or degrading the value of the protagonist. So it's a give and take situation, and these characters are developed based on how the story or how the author portrays the character. So just like in the story Maleficent, in the fairy tale, Maleficent was just named as a witch in the story of Snow White. Wait, Snow White or Sleeping Beauty rather. So he was portrayed as an evil villain. He was the antagonist. But in the recent adaptation of the movie Maleficent, at first he was the protagonist, then he became the antagonist, and again he became the protagonist. So it mainly portrays that the characters are developed throughout the story, not because he has an evil exterior or he has a look of a villain. This doesn't mean that he's already an antagonist. It just depends on the character and the author. And of course, the theme, what the story is about. Next would be the conflict, the problem. So, a problem between two characters or groups. And there are mainly four kinds of conflicts: man against man, man against nature, man versus society, and man versus himself. So, any story should have at least one of them, one of the conflicts present in order to have a good story. Next would be the rising action. The rising action are events that happen in a story that move the action along as the problem builds up and causes complication. So in layman's term, the rising action gears the readers and gets them ready for the main event, which is the climax, which is coming next. So climax, so where the action story builds and the conflict must be faced, the turning point of the story right before the problem is solved. The climax usually leaves readers on edge of their seats. So like what we said, in the rising action, we are being geared as the readers. We are geared towards the climax. The climax is the main event or the main point of emphasis in any literary piece. So it's usually the point where the antagonist and the protagonist meets and they would face each other. Thus, it said in here that conflicts must be faced, and usually you would know how the story would end after the climax. And after the climax, this is what we now call as the resolution. So the resolution is the action, the winding down of the action, and the solving of the problem. So it's like any given problem in the climax, it needs to have a resolution. So if you were cooking, this would be the time where the climax would be the time where you boil, and everything comes to boil. What you're cooking is boiling, and the resolution is when you go or you put it into simmer. And lastly is the review. So for our review, again, the basic elements of a plot: expositions, which is composed of time, the setting, the characters, and the theme. Again, characters could be antagonists or protagonists, depending on how the story builds up. Next, we have the conflict, in which the problem or the first problem arises, in which there are four classifications, whether it would be man against man, man against himself, man against society, or man against nature. Then we have the rising action, is where the levels escalate to a point that it brings us to the climax. Now, the climax is the main event, so it's like the main event in a boxing match, just like in the recent fight of Pacquiao and Mayweather. And lastly is the resolution. So any good story would have its resolution.